1 in 5 Howard Law graduates can't find a job right now. Howard's employment rate just dropped nearly 15 points in 1 year. 33 of their recent graduates are sitting at home right now, refreshing their LinkedIns, unemployed 10 months after graduation. Nobody else is reporting on this right now. I spent the past 2 days looking at the data, and it's not what I expected. Two doors closed at Howard this year, both at once. And Howard is virtually the only law school in the country where that happened. Now, here's what I thought the story was going to be. Summer of 2023, the Supreme Court strikes down race based affirmative action in college admissions. But the real downstream effect wasn't on colleges, it was on corporate diversity programs. Within 12 months, a long list of law firms had restructured, renamed, or quietly wound down their diversity fellowship programs. Multiple law firms settled with the federal government over hiring practices, and the recruiting channels that used to carry graduates from historically black law schools into the biggest law firms either got smaller or disappeared entirely. Now, Howard Law's class of 2025 did their summer job interviews in the summer of 2024, the first full cycle after all of that happened. And so my thesis here was pretty simple. If Howard's graduates leaned on those diversity recruiting channels more than their peer schools did, they would walk into a market where the channels had just contracted, and Howard was going to feel it harder than any other school. So I ran the numbers, and it looked like I was right. Howard places roughly 60 graduates a year into the biggest law firms in the country. I'm talking firms with 500 attorneys or more. Those are the jobs that pay first-year lawyers more than most people earn in 10 years. The kind of job a Howard grad takes specifically because the money is what makes law school debt manageable. Last year, 58 Howard graduates landed one of those jobs. Only 45 of them landed one of those jobs this year, so that's 13 jobs gone in a single cycle. Nationally, placements at those firms shrunk about 8%. Howard's contracted 15%, almost double the national rate. Then I pulled the data for every historically black law school in the country. I added up their big firm numbers, 12% contraction at historically black schools, 8% everywhere else. So a 4-point gap that nobody else has reported on yet. At that point, I was ready to sit down and hit record, make a video for all of you. But then I looked at how each historically black school did individually, and what seemed like a clean story actually kind of fell apart. If diversity recruiting pullback were the whole story at Howard, every historically black law school would also be down. Different amounts, sure, but the same direction. But that's not actually what the data shows. Take, for example, North Carolina Central, another historically black law school. Same graduating class as Howard, same national job market. Their unemployment rate dropped from 12.7% last year down to 7.3% this year. So they cut their unemployment in half. Florida A&M improved. Texas Southern's big firm placements actually grew. So two other historically black schools held steady. Only Howard and one other school collapsed. And that other school, University of the District of Columbia, has basically zero big firm placements to begin with. And so their collapse can't be about big firms. So the historically black aggregate story is still real. Big firms pulled back from these schools faster than from everybody else. And that's news, sure. But that alone doesn't explain why Howard's unemployment tripled while North Carolina Central's got cut in half. There is something else that broke at Howard on top of the big firm pullback, and so I want to figure out what that is. Now, Howard reports where its graduates end up to the American Bar Association in 14 different categories. I pulled the data on all of them, did the math on every single one. Most categories barely moved. Government jobs actually went up for Howard. Public interest went up a little bit. Federal clerkships held steady. Small and mid-sized firms wiggled a little bit in both directions, basically a wash. There are two categories that did almost all the damage. The first one is big firms. Already talked about that, down 13%. But here is the second one, and this is the part that nobody else is covering. State and local clerkships. A clerkship is where you spend a year or two working directly for a judge after you graduate. You help them write opinions, you help them research cases, it's prestigious, and it's almost always a stepping stone to a better job a year or two later. Now, state and local clerkships at Howard means DC. the DC Superior Court, the DC Court of Appeals, specialty courts around the city. It's a historically stable path, keeps Howard grads in DC, builds their local network, rolls into private practice a year or two later. Last year, 15 Howard graduates got those jobs. This year, only 5 people got those jobs, only 5 graduates. So 2/3 of that pipeline gone in one cycle. So I checked for the other historically black law schools, and their state clerkship numbers were basically flat. So this is not happening across historically black schools. Then I checked the other DC area law schools. Georgetown's state clerkships went up by 3%, American universities went up by 9%, Catholics went up by 5%. GW basically held flat. So every other DC school either held or grew their state clerkship placements. Howard is the only school in the city where those jobs evaporated. So that rules out a lot here. It's not diversity recruiting. It's not the federal government. It's not a DC-wide court hiring freeze. Other DC schools placed more graduates into those same courts. It's something specific to Howard's relationship with the DC courts in the class of 2025. Now, big firms pull back from dozens of schools this year. Berkeley lost 61 placements, Boston College lost 70, Texas lost 69, Emory lost 36, but none of their employment rates collapsed. Because at every one of those schools, other placement channels absorbed the hit. State clerkships held steady, government hiring held, business jobs held. When big firms pulled back, there was somewhere else for those students to go. Big firms is one door, and those schools had other doors open. Howard had both doors close on them at the same time. So I pulled the data for every law school in America when the American Bar Association dropped their employment numbers yesterday. I filtered for schools that lost 8 or more big firm placements and lost 8 or more state or local clerkships in the same year. There were only 3 law schools in the entire country that fit that profile: Howard, George Mason, and Seton Hall. George Mason's unemployment stayed flat. Seton Hall's actually improved. Only Howard's exploded. Even inside the tiny group of schools hit by the same 2 losses at the same time, Howard is still the outlier. 2 doors closing was not enough to break George Mason, wasn't enough to break Seton Hall, but it did break Howard Law. And that tells me there is a third factor amplifying what happened at Howard. And I have some theories about what that is that I'm going to share. Now, the one that I think matters most, although I can't fully prove it yet, is that Howard expanded its class this year. 147 graduates last year, 155 this year. That's 8 more students walking across the stage, a 5% bigger class, into a market that was actively shrinking Howard's 2 biggest placement channels. So think about what that means for the Career Services Office at Howard. Last year, they had 147 students and placed almost all of them. This year, they had 155, but fewer jobs to place them into than existed 12 months earlier. The system was not built to handle class growth in the year when the pipeline was simultaneously contracting. If you add students into a shrinking market, you break the entire placement machinery. So that alone accounts for a big piece of the gap between Howard and the peer schools that absorbed the double hit. There's a second possibility as well: bar passage rates. If fewer Howard graduates pass the bar exam on their first try this summer, those graduates can't take jobs that require being a licensed lawyer. They'll show up in the data as unemployed, even if they did everything right in law school. Now, the data on Howard's July 2025 first-time bar passage rates is not public yet, but if it dropped, that's a big part of the answer. A third possibility: Howard has deeper exposure to big firms than most historically black law schools. In other words, big firm placement is a bigger share of Howard's class than it is at North Carolina Central or Florida A&M. And so when big firms pull back across the board, Howard's going to take a bigger share of the pain. Not a separate factor, it's more of an amplifier of the first 2. Now, what this looks like on the ground is one bad cycle at one school in one year with several different independent problems stacking up on top of each other in the worst possible timing, essentially a perfect storm. Now, if you're applying to law school this cycle, this matters even if you're not looking at Howard. Your question is not, what's the employment rate? Your real question is, if the biggest channel at this law school shrinks 15% in a year, what's going to absorb the hit? At Berkeley, Boston College, Emory, other channels were able to absorb it. But at Howard, a second channel collapsed at the exact same time, and there was nothing left. Now, every law school has a placement pipeline, one or two channels doing most of the work. And so if you're evaluating a given law school, you want to know which channels carry their employment and whether there's any cushion if the market takes a turn. Now, a 15-point employment collapse is a pretty big warning sign. And so if you're considering Howard, if you're considering any law school really, you want to walk into admissions with a couple of questions in mind. First, what was the class of 2025's first-time bar passage rate? Second, if big firm placements dropped, why? If local clerkships dropped, if state clerkships dropped, you also want to ask why. And what concrete steps is the school taking to restore placements in these channels? And if the admissions can't give you hard numbers, if they just give you vague reassurances, you've got your answer, right? And none of this means don't go to Howard or don't go to any other given law school. It means go in with your eyes open, negotiate scholarships harder, understand the network you're actually joining when you attend that particular law school. And of course, if you want to maximize your law school options, get into better law schools with better employment outcomes, you want to get better scholarship offers, the single best way to do that is to get a higher LSAT score, ideally above the medians of the schools to which you're applying. Gets you more scholarship money, maybe even a full ride, helps you have more optionality upon graduating so that you can choose the jobs you really want to pursue. And to help you get there, I'm offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. Happy to meet with you personally, help you craft your plan of attack to get you from your current starting point up to your goal LSAT score on your time frame. So what we do during these calls is we look at where you're currently at, if you've taken a practice test or not, what your goal LSAT score is, and what your time frame is to achieve that goal score. I've also put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to get that free easy LSAT cheat sheet is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. The link is again below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Gives you a good jump start on logical reasoning and reading comprehension, gives you the basics, gives you a good starting point for your prep. Now, I've got a number of questions I see dropping here in the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can, so feel free to keep them coming. Nick asks, when applying to law school, do schools still consider if you are a minority? I'm assuming you mean underrepresented minority. And the answer is maybe. We don't really know, right? I mean, based on the Supreme Court decision banning race-based affirmative action, law schools cannot explicitly give you a boost simply on the basis of your race. And the federal government is, of course, actively investigating as we speak whether law schools are still giving a boost for being an underrepresented minority. If they are, of course, they could be subject to lawsuits in violation of the Supreme Court decision. That being said, though, law schools do still care about maintaining diverse classes, including racial diversity, ethnic diversity, and you are more than welcome to. You are free to share anything you want about your background that you think would be of interest to admission. So you can talk about your racial or ethnic diversity in your application essays, and law schools will make of that what they will. They do want to consider it insofar as it helps to craft your unique background and your perspective. But it's unclear to what extent you will get an explicit boost in terms of numbers. Cheat Shows Productions is asking, how long should I study for a 155 to 160 LSAT score? So my first question would be, where are you scoring right now? Because basically, if we want to know how long is it going to take you to get to a given score, we want to know your starting point, right? If you're starting off at a 120, it's going to take longer than if you're starting off at a 150. But in a way, I would actually change the way I approach this problem or this goal in mind, right? Because we don't want to just get you to a given score. We want to maximize your score, get you the highest LSAT score possible. And so I'd really start by asking, how much time do you actually have before you take your LSAT? And can you give it your all between now and then? I mean, assuming that you're applying to law school this fall, you're applying in 2026 to start law school in 2027, you could take the LSAT in August and apply the second that applications open in September. And there's no reason not to allow that at least that next 3.5 months or so, right? So why not give yourself 3.5 months to get the highest possible score. You take it early August, your score comes back late August, you apply when applications open in September. So then the question is, could I hit a 160 plus in 3.5 months, given wherever I'm starting? Do I need a bit more time? If so, maybe take it in September. You could still apply the month applications open. And with 3.5 months or 4.5 months, putting in 10, 15, maybe 20 hours a week, there is plenty of time to improve your score significantly from wherever you're starting. You have time to build a strong foundation. You have time to learn the different sections and the different question types. You have time to take plenty of full-length timed practice tests. And if you want to talk through prep options, get some support for your LSAT journey, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio as well. I've also got that free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to get the LSAT cheat sheet for free, no strings attached. It's below the video and pinned in the chat as well. Happy to help you out. Justin says, I go to Cornell and I'm starting to study in May to take it in November before I go abroad. Is that smart, or do I need more time? So you're allowing roughly 6 months to take the LSAT. Do you need more time than 6 months? Maybe. Depends. I guess my question would be, have you taken a practice test yet? If so, what was that number? What's your goal LSAT score, or where do you want to go to law school? In other words, we have to get specific on the goal that we have in mind before deciding how much work it's going to take to get there and craft an action plan. I always want to start with a particular end goal. I mean, you go to Cornell, Ivy League undergrad. Do you want to go to a top tier law school? Do you want to go to a top 14 law school where the LSAT medians are 170 to 174? Or would you be happy going to a lower ranked law school, maybe with more scholarship money? Either way, I still suggest maximizing your LSAT score, but 6 months could be enough time to get a top score. Whether it's going to be enough, I can't say, but if you study properly, 6 months is plenty of time to really make anything happen. I got to see a question here from Mo Ogi asking, would you recommend going to a GPPA honors college program, meaning guaranteed law acceptance, and finishing a year earlier? But it's only an all-right law school. It's the John Marshall Law School. So John Marshall, my understanding is that that is not one of the better law schools. So when you say all right, maybe a better word would be mediocre. I would look carefully at their 509 data. In other words, the American Bar Association report sharing their employment outcomes and their bar passage rates. In general, I don't love the programs where you get a guaranteed law acceptance where it's combined bachelor's and JD, in part because you lose all of your scholarship negotiation leverage. You're trading away the uncertainty of having to actually apply to a variety of law schools, and law school, the John Marshall in this case, is taking advantage of your dislike of uncertainty by giving you a guaranteed pathway to their law school, but in exchange, you're likely to pay a sticker price or get a pretty minimal scholarship on your tuition. So I think it's a pretty bad move. I would recommend against it in virtually every case. And Phaedra, if you want the free easy LSAT cheat sheet, the link's in my bio. You can just access it there. Click the link in my TikTok or IG bio, and you can get the free easy LSAT cheat sheet. You can download you can book the free LSAT tutoring lesson for those who haven't already. It's all there. Bridget's asking, I'm legally blind and need to attend a hybrid program outside my state. Which online hybrid JD program offers the best placements? That's a fantastic question. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the data is available on that. The online hybrid programs are pretty new. They're pretty small. And I don't know if the law schools are separately itemizing what their outcomes are for the students who attend online or hybrid versus attending in person. You know, they often say a law school's reputation is best in its region. And when you're applying to an online school, there really is no region in the same way. So I wonder if perhaps the placement outcomes actually are not as good as they would be for going in person. It's good that you mentioned that you're legally blind as well, because another consideration would be which law schools are better equipped to give you the appropriate accommodations. Of course, they are legally required to accommodate you, is my understanding, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but the extent of what those accommodations may look like in practice may vary from school to school, and so it might be worth having a conversation with them as well. Oh, Kiki's asking, I have a mortgage interested in attending law school full-time? Do people work in these situations? So law schools actually do not allow you to work while you're in school. As Phaedra says, usually you can't work first year. You got to pay out of pocket or take out loans or get scholarships. Exactly right. So if you have a mortgage and you're attending law school, the question does become, how are you going to keep paying your mortgage if you're not working during that time? And so the question becomes, do you have a spouse or a significant other or family who can help you during that time? Or if not, do you have savings? Or can your loans help you out with that? Tricky situation for sure. Of course, you also can work over the summer during breaks, so that could bring in some money, although not the same as a full-time, full-year position, of course. Justin says, I'm going to study 6 hours a day all summer and hopefully go get a 172 or higher. Awesome. Yeah. So if you're going to study full-time all summer, that's going to do a lot to help you boost up your score. And then, of course, you can go into more of a lighter maintenance mode during the academic year when classes resume. But if you look at the 3 months from mid-May to mid-August, that's going to do a lot to build a strong foundation. And then from mid-August till you take your LSAT, it could be as little as just doing 1 full practice test a week along with detailed review of that in more of a maintenance mode. That might be sufficient. And one thing we do during those free LSAT tutoring lessons, by the way, is we put together an action plan for you. We put together a study plan for you, looking at where you're currently scoring, what your goal score is, and what your time frame is. I help you craft a personal study plan to maximize your score. And so I'll give you some advice on how to make the best use of your full-time studying, how to then make the best use of your more limited time when you're back in school, helping you schedule your studying around your classes and other obligations you might have. And so you can book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. We could talk through it more. Keep the questions coming, folks. I'm just scanning through for anything I missed before. Tamiela asks, what time do you wake up every day to do this every day? Okay, so these lives, for those who are just joining, welcome. I do these daily live Q&As every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. As for when I wake up, that's a very different story. I've got 3 young kids, and so it's really based on when they wake up. Is when I wake up today, my middle child, who's 3, woke me up at 5 a.m., and so I've been up since then. Some days a little bit earlier, some days a little bit later. Usually spend the morning helping the kids get ready for school, breakfast, and such, and then I start working around 8:30, and that's when I start looking into the news and the data and responding to emails and such, putting together the notes on what I'm going to talk about for the day. This week's been a pretty big one with the American Bar Association dropping those employment numbers. And with nearly 200 law schools, there's a lot of data to dig into. And of course, Howard was a pretty big outlier that I thought was worth talking about. But each day is different. You never know what's going to happen, right? Jaden's asking, if I have a 171 LSAT but a 2728 GPA, where should I be applying and what should I expect? And then Phaedra responds, he can't tell you that. You just have to decide where you want to go. Yeah, fair. I mean, you're an extreme splitter, Jaden. Extreme splitter being you've got a super high LSAT and a relatively lower GPA. Your LSAT score is going to do a lot to offset the GPA. When you say, if I have a 171, I guess I'm wondering, do you actually have a 171, or is that a theoretical 171 that you're hoping for but haven't actually scored yet? 2 very different things, right? If it's a theoretical 171, let's make it real first before we look into anything else, right? Because achieving a given score is easier said than done. Might take more work than you're expecting. Maybe not, hopefully not, but we got to get you there first, right? So you see that you're saying here, you're PTing at a 169 to 171, currently finishing your sophomore year. All right, so you're scoring in a good range. Let's hit that 171, lock it down on paper. In your score report, take the LSAT in April or June, or sorry, in June or August, lock it in. And then as for where could you go, I would cast a wide net, especially because of that extreme splitter situation, right? So there are going to be some law schools, to be frank, that are not going to love the relatively lower GPA. You can still raise it somewhat, though. You said you're only in your sophomore year, right? So you've still got spring semester, sophomore year to finish strong. Then you've got potentially another another 4 semesters beyond the one you're finishing now. So 5 out of 8 semesters could end up being great. It's not a done deal yet. So let's get you that 171 on paper. Let's raise your undergraduate GPA. And then you can still have room to rewrite your story significantly, both on the LSAT and the GPA. Some law schools won't love the GPA, but they will love a higher LSAT. And also, why say 171? Why not say 175? If you're hoping for a higher score, don't just aim for a 171, which is what, top 3% or so. Aim for 175, aim for 180. You've got room to raise it more. Why not shoot for that? And if you're not yet done with your LSAT prep, if you're looking for support, looking for guidance, I've put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. It covers everything you need to know in both logical reasoning and reading comprehension, every section, every question type, every method of reasoning, everything I wish I knew back when I was studying for the LSAT. It's a free download. The link to get it is in my bio on TikTok and IG, below the video on YouTube in the description of the video. Just giving it away, more free information. Then, of course, beyond that, I'm also offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Justin's asking, should I book the call this week? Haven't taken a diagnostic yet, but I'm starting early May. Yeah, you can book the call. I would start booking the call now. I can actually give you some guidance on how to take that diagnostic to get a real gauge on where you stand, to get an accurate read of your current situation, because some practice tests are better or different than others depending on the conditions in which you take them. Ali is asking, if I get a 178 LSAT with a 3.7 GPA, am I a splitter or just a high prestige applicant? Theoretical. Okay, so I would say with a 3.7 GPA and a high LSAT, it's not splitter. 3.7 GPA is high enough to be a solid GPA. It's not low. It's not as high as it could be, of course, but still a solid GPA. Again, let's make the 178 LSAT concrete and real rather than theoretical. Because hypothetical, to do chance me this or chance me that with hypotheticals is really pointless. You can look up the data for yourself in the 509 reports or law school decisions, lsd.law, to see what your actual chances would be at various law schools with any given LSAT score. But in a sense, a lot of that's a distraction from actually just studying for the LSAT and locking in that score. So that's where I would focus the energy first. Prof. Auntie Tammy's asking, I'm an older person interested in law school. What are my chances? Your chances are based on your LSAT score and your GPA. So I would get the numbers down and then have that conversation. As for being an older applicant, though, that does not mean you can't go to law school. Law schools love so-called non-traditional or older applicants because you have more real-world concrete life experience than the so-called KJDs going directly from undergrad into law school. And so highlight your work experience, highlight your resume, highlight what you've done, get killer rec letters. Law schools will take you. They're not going to look down on you for that. Faith asks, will taking practice tests weekly help boost my score before August? They certainly could. I guess the question would be, have you built a strong foundation first? In other words, have you learned the basics of the LSAT, the different sections, and the different question types? That's where I would start before taking practice tests. Otherwise, a practice test just tells you what you already know, which is that you haven't yet learned the language of the LSAT. But of course you can. But if you take the practice test without building the foundation, you're just burning through valuable, limited practice material without learning the lay of the land first. So I would start by taking getting the strong foundation, taking a course, getting some private coaching, getting some resources to learn the material. We offer all of the above, of course, at LSAT Unplugged. We offer personalized private coaching programs. We offer on-demand video courses. We give you a custom study plan. We also run live small group sessions 4 nights a week. And so there's a lot of support available to you if you want to take advantage of it. And if you want to talk through what that could look like, you can, of course, book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. We could talk through it together. Matrix asks, how often should we take full practice tests? I would say 1 or 2 a week typically is probably not a bad idea, not a bad cadence after you've built that strong foundation. If you're working or you're in school, you have family obligations, 1 test a week is probably a pretty good baseline for your study plan. If you are doing nothing but studying for the LSAT, no other obligations, if you're in the kind of situation where you could easily put in 5 or 6 hours a day, then maybe 2 practice tests a week, assuming that you would still have adequate time to review those mistakes in depth. Now I see Cohen's asking, I got a 154 on my diagnostic. Is it possible to achieve a 175 by August? 21 points in 3.5 months is definitely doable. It's going to take work. It's not going to happen overnight. But if you're starting off at a 154, there's plenty of room to improve. I mean, I personally improved my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. So ballpark around your starting point, ended up around your goal score. Took me an entire year though, and at least half of that was a total waste of time. If I'd done it properly, I probably could have knocked it out in a couple months, because ultimately the LSAT's all about pattern recognition. And so if you can analyze the mistakes, get down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong, then you can avoid making the same mistakes again, and that's when your score is going to increase. So feel free to book the free tutoring with me and we could talk through that as well. Gavin asks, how were you at high school standardized tests? It's a great question. It varied depending on the topic. I was definitely more of a humanities person than a STEM person, but one thing I actually learned in high school that I kind of forgot for the LSAT and had to relearn was the value of redoing practice tests. And if there were practice tests available to me, then just doing a bunch of those, studying those, doing them inside out, because they repeat the exact same things over and over. And so I'm a New Yorker, and in New York we have these exams in high school called the Regents exams. They're a statewide high school standardized test that is a replacement for the final exams. And they publish all of the old exams that they administered going back several years. And so if you could just download the PDFs of the old exams and print those out and study those, then there's really no surprises on test day. And so there were some subjects where I actually wasn't that good at the topic, but because I just did a lot of the old exams, I was able to learn all the material through the exams, and that way I wasn't going to be surprised by anything on test day. And so it's kind of nice, actually, the LSAT people do the same thing. I mean, they've published 59 numbered practice tests on the Law Hub website on lsac.org, the Law School Admission Council. And so if you just get access to those practice tests and you do them and redo them, then there's not going to be any surprises on test day. Ali asks, do you need to be good at reading and writing to succeed in law school and as a lawyer, or would law school train you from the ground up? I'm coming from no reading or writing background. Good question. So I think that if you're not good at reading and writing, you're going to have a pretty tough time in law school and be in for a pretty rude awakening. I would try to build those skills prior. And in a way, like, the LSAT is actually pretty good training for the in-depth analysis of arguments and in-depth critical reading that you're going to be doing in law school. Of course, the LSAT isn't really training writing in the same way, in part because the writing sample is unscored, so no one has incentive to really care about the writing sample. And it's not like LSAT's giving you feedback on your writing or anything, but at least on the reading side, the LSAT is good training for that. Now, a lot of people will say that law school does retrain you in reading and writing, but it comes at a cost, and the cost is your time, the cost is your grades, the cost is your sanity. And so it would be good to build those skills prior to law school for sure. But first and foremost, just ace the LSAT. At least that way you'll get into better law schools and have more options and get more scholarship money. The writing you can train on more this summer before law school and retrain the reading more as well. Once you get into law school, I think it's premature to think about the law school skills separately in isolation until you've maximized your LSAT score. In a way, studying for the LSAT is already some pre-training, and it has the additional benefit of getting you into better law schools, getting you more scholarship money. And given the cost of law school, it's really the easiest money you're ever going to make, just to get more scholarship money and get a full ride. So I would focus your energy there to begin with. I see a couple of related questions here. Mugi's asking, when should pre-laws begin studying for the LSAT? Officer Nubs asks, is sophomore year too early to start studying? Not necessarily. I mean, study for the LSAT whenever you have time to study for the LSAT. Your score is good for 5 years. So if you want to take it as a sophomore or a junior, lock in that score, have it on your score report, apply a couple of years later, that's fine. Your score's still going to be valid. At the same time, though, if you're not yet ready to carve out the time, if you're not sure that law school is right for you, you could always just put the LSAT on the back burner, focus on your grades in college if you're still in college, get that upward trend going in your GPA. The LSAT's not going anywhere. You could come back to it in a year or two. I see Gavin's asking, does a bad LSAT score hurt you or only the best matters? So the good news is that only the best LSAT score on your record matters. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record. And so that means there is no downside to retaking the LSAT. If you do worse, no big deal. Your previous high score is the one that matters. If you do better, great. Now you've got a higher score on your record. So take it when you're scoring reasonably well, when you're scoring at or above your goal. But if you've got to retake it to do better, then retake it. Why not? No downside. That's part of what's actually contributing to all the LSAT score inflation that we're seeing these days. In other words, LSAT medians at law schools are rising across the board year after year after year because the LSAT's gone from being offered 4 times a year to 8 times a year. And so with more opportunities to retake it, more people are retaking it and getting higher scores, and only the highest score counts. So that's what ultimately matters. Nick asks, do you think we should prioritize newer practice tests over older ones when studying? Yeah, I do. The LSAT has evolved over time, so more recent practice tests are more relevant. Of course, some of these changes are a bit more subtle than others, but best to focus on the newest exams. And so if you're taking the LSAT in August, for example, and there are 59 numbered exams, maybe you want to focus your studying on the most recent 20 or so. If you're taking it in 6 months, focus on the more recent 40. In other words, go from exam 120 to 159, but don't do exam 101 at the expense of ever getting to exam 159. So make a schedule for yourself, starting with your target LSAT test date, and then working backwards from that. And by the way, one of the things we do for our students is we create for you a personal study plan, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till the test, building up the strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types, doing individual timed sections to work on your pacing and time management, and then pulling it all together with full-length timed practice tests. And if you want to talk through what your LSAT study plan could look like, I'm happy to meet with you personally. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this live now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. That's an open offer for everybody watching this now or later, by the way. I see Voss says, just got -1 on a logical reasoning section. I'm taking the LSAT in June. How confident should I feel with that? So congrats, -1's an awesome place to be on a single section. At the same time, though, that is only one isolated data point. We don't want to over-index on what could be an outlier. So I would say, do it again and do it again after that. If you can do it 3 or 4 consecutive times, get a -1 on a section or pretty close to that, then we have more reason to believe in the validity of that result. But don't over-index on your best day or your worst day. Take the average of your most recent 5 exams, and that's going to be the best indication of where you stand. You've still got roughly 6 weeks till your test, so plenty of time to take more practice tests and raise your baseline. And if you want to review that section, you want to talk through what your study plan could look like, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me. Happy to discuss it further. And for anyone who's looking for a quick resource on logical reasoning and reading comprehension, I put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your prep, serve as a quick reference to every LSAT section, every LSAT question type, give you an overview of the different strategies. I put together this in-depth document The link to get it is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. The link is below the video on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. No strings attached, open to everybody watching this now or later, 100% free. Now, again, for those just joining, I do these lives every weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, all the best. Take care. Thanks for joining.